I found this tissue paper at Home Goods last month, and I thought this would be a great product to use for decoupaging. So we're starting out with this wood piece that I have from the Dollar Tree. And I grabbed my Mod Podge in the matte finish, and I'm going to go ahead and paint a nice coat of Mod Podge over the top of our wood piece. And because this is wood, I am going to go ahead and do a little bit thicker coat than I normally would, just because it's a little bit more porous, and I didn't do a coat of paint ahead of time. And by doing it this way, what we're going to do is we're going to allow that tissue paper to just really soak into the wood. And this will make it look like it's part of the wood in the grain and less like it's on top of the wood. Now, once we have that coat of Mod Podge down, I do take my heat tool and I'm going to just give it a quick little assist in drying it, so that way it'll dry just a little bit quicker. And once everything is dry, I am going to place that piece of tissue paper right over the top, and we'll use the iron-on method with our piece of parchment paper and our little mini iron, and we'll just iron this right onto our board. Now let's go ahead and remove that piece of parchment paper, and I'm grabbing my zip sander, but any sort of sanding block or sandpaper, even an emery board would work. I sand down in a downward motion just to trim everything up so it looks like it's flush with our board. Now, once our edges are perfect, I take that same zip sander and I'm just going to run that across the lines that are in the board to remove the tissue paper from those areas. And this is going to make it look like this whole entire piece came from the store looking just like this. This looks amazing, guys. And I don't think that my video shows it justice, but it looks like it's just part of the wood. Now I'm going to set that aside for a moment, and I found this snake at the Dollar Tree, and I actually thought this would be a really cute pumpkin. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove the tail and the head, and I'm going to hot glue and wood glue the two end pieces that are left here and shape it in an ovalish shape like a pumpkin. What I found worked good for me is I put a tiny bit of that hot glue on one side and wood glue on the other. I held it in place for a few minutes, and then I grabbed my clip, and I'm just going to clip that for about an hour till it dries. And while that's drying, I take the head of my little snake here, and I wanted to cover the eyes up. So I'm using some floral tape, and I'm just going to wrap that all the way around the entire face of the snake. And once I have this whole thing wrapped up, I am going to come back around, and I'm going to paint this with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Truffle. Now, once our stem is completely painted and dried, we have all of our components to put together our piece. And before I glue anything together, I do place everything on our wood board here just to make sure I have everything positioned the way I want it. Because once you use that hot glue, it sticks really quickly, really fast. So you're not going to be able to move it around. So you need to make sure you have your bottom piece of the pumpkin in a spot where you can still have your stem on the back board. Now that we have our pumpkin glued to our board, I did want to add one last embellishment. So using my hot glue and a beautiful bow, I'm just going to add that right there on our pumpkin. And now our happy little pumpkin is ready to display. I love how cheerful this pumpkin and sunflower is, and I think this is a great piece just to brighten your day in the fall. Today we're going to start with a sign from Dollar General, some pumpkins from the Dollar Tree, and a beautiful napkin. And for our first step here, I'm going to go ahead and just pop out the backing on this sign. Now I grab my little zip sander, and I'm just going to sand any of the rough edges and paper that was still left over onto this sign. And a quick shout out to Robin at Crafts Unleashed, Thank you so much for sending me a box of goodies from Dollar General. It's so much fun getting new supplies that I don't normally get up here in the Pacific Northwest. Thank you guys for watching, and let's get back to the video. Now let's go ahead and tend to the backing. I'm just going to spray a little bit of water on there, and I'm just using a paper towel, and I'm wiping that down, and then once that has soaked in a little bit, I'm able to take my Cricut spatula here and just scrape any of that excess paper off of this backing. Now that everything is prepped, I'm going to take the wood frame and place this down on a paintable surface. Now, using my apple barrel paint in the color English Navy, I'm going to go ahead and paint a nice coat around this frame. And you may have noticed that I did tape this down to the piece of cardboard, and this really helps when you're painting the sides of different things at the same time as the top, just so you can move things around easily on the paintable surface so nothing else gets any paint on it. And in case you're wondering, it did take me 3 coats of paint to paint this frame. Now let's grab those pumpkins from the Dollar Tree, and we're just going to use one of these pumpkins. I take the stem out and the clip, and putting this down on my cutting mat, I'm taking my craft knife and I'm just going to slice this in half. Now let's go ahead and take half of that pumpkin and tape that down to a paintable surface. And using my Delta Creations metallic gold paint, I'm going to go ahead and paint a coat of paint over the top of this half of pumpkin. Now while our paint dries, I grab this beautiful napkin, and you can see that there's a gold inlay in this on one of the quadrants. So once we remove the back 2 layers of this napkin, that quadrant will be the quadrant that we'll use for this project. And a helpful hint, to get that back layer of the napkin off, all I use is a piece of painter's tape, and I stick that on the back side of the napkin and just pull that layer. Moving back to our backing, I'm going to go ahead and tape this down to a paintable surface, and using my Waverly paint in the color Plaster, we're going to give a nice coat of paint to this board. And once our paint is completely dry, I grab my Mod Podge in matte, and I'm just going to go ahead and paint a coat of Mod Podge over the top of the paint. And we're going to let this completely dry. Now, taking our napkin, I'm going to cut out the quadrant that has all of that gold inlay in it. And next, we're going to lay this right on top of our square. And using a piece of parchment paper over the top of that, I'll take my hot iron and iron that napkin right onto our square. And if you've never done this before, it is really simple. What's happening is that hot iron is going to go ahead and melt the Mod Podge and allow the napkin to stick to your surface. Now don't worry about the excess napkin on here. We just grab our zip sander and sand in a downward motion, and all of that easily is removed. And now to seal this napkin in, I'm taking my matte clear enamel Rust-Oleum, and I take this outside and just give it a quick spray. And a few more final touches, I'm taking that stem that we pulled out of the pumpkin, and I'm just going to go ahead and paint that with the English Navy paint. And once that paint has dried, I go ahead and take my hot glue and reattach the stem to our half a pumpkin. And now to reattach the backing to our frame, I grab my wood glue and a few of my pink clips, and I'm just going to paint the wood glue around the outside of that frame, and using a tiny bit of hot glue, we'll go ahead and attach this backing. And now that everything is attached, I go ahead and take those pink clips and I just clip everything into place and let this sit for about an hour. Now let's go ahead and remove those clips and put our pumpkin in our little frame. Once I've positioned the frame the way I would like the napkin to look, I take my hot glue and I'm just going to hot glue that pumpkin right in the center. Now once that dries, our decor piece is ready to display. I just love how this turns out. It'd be perfect for a tiered tray or just to place on a shelf. Let me know what you think of the gold and the pumpkin in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. It really helps my channel grow. Thanks! These little baskets have become a staple item at the Dollar Tree. And what I'm going to do is turn these into beautiful little pumpkins. Before I even bring these baskets home with me from the Dollar Tree, I check them out at the store to match up a few of the baskets to make sure that they fit well together. Because depending on where they're at in the stack of the baskets, some are a tiny bit wider and a tiny bit more narrow. You just don't know. So while you're there, just try to find two that match up. Now, once you find that perfect pair of baskets and you bring them home, we're going to go ahead and just grab our hot glue gun. And all we're going to do is just add a bead of hot glue around the edge of one of the baskets. All you have to do is sandwich these two together and let them dry for a few minutes. Now, once that has completely dried, what I'm going to do here is I don't want to see that seam between the two baskets. So I'm adding a little bit of hot glue, about 3 or 4 inches at a time. I'm just going to place a piece of ribbon over the top of that hot glue, and we'll continue doing that until we've done the whole perimeter of our pumpkin. Now all you need to do is trim the excess ribbon off and glue that little piece down, and you have the base of your pumpkin. Now for our stem on our pumpkin, I'm using these little birch pieces that I found at the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to attach it with Fix All from Super Glue and a little bit of hot glue. And now once our stem is attached, we can add our embellishment. For this one, I'm just going to add a simple little bow with some hot glue to the top. And if you're not into bows, you could add some leaves, you could add some Spanish moss, maybe just tie a little piece of fabric on there. You could do whatever you'd like to embellish these. Now here is what our first pumpkin looks like. And with such a cute, fun, simple project, I couldn't just make one, so I did make 2 additional ones to have a fun set of 3. For the second pumpkin here, I used the darker baskets for this and a little bit different ribbons. And for the third pumpkin, I went more with a black and white themed, and I'm using some black and white ribbon around the border of this pumpkin. And then for the top, we're going to do a little raffia bow and a sheer black ribbon just to give it a different look. So I would love to hear from you guys. Let's vote. Which one do we like better? Number 1, number 2, or number 3? Which pumpkin? Please leave a comment below on what your favorite pumpkin is. Let's make some mini pumpkins. I recently discovered Woodpecker Crafts, and I am in love with these little spindles that they have. And they come in a 10-pack, and I'll leave a link in my description box below. These things are amazing. And I'm going to take one of these spindles, and I'm going to use these cutters. And these cutters are from the garden center at the Dollar Tree, and they work really well to cut different things. So we're going to make 2 cute little stems that look a little bit different because of the way that the knob is in the middle of that spindle. Now I grabbed my zip sander just to sand off any little rough edges that there might be from my cut. Next, I'm going to grab these wood cubes that I found at the Dollar Tree, and these are adorable. So if you see them at the Dollar Tree, grab them. You can do so many fun things with them. But for this project, we're going to make pumpkins. So I'm taking a drill and a 1/4-inch drill bit, and I'm just going to drill a little hole in the center of our cube. These cubes are hollow, so they're very easy to drill. But if you're nervous about drilling these, I do have a second way of making these later on in the video to show you. Now, with that hole drilled, I want to do a fit check just to make sure that that spindle fits nicely into that hole, and it does fit perfectly. So we are all ready to start doing our decorating for these pumpkins. So one of the cubes, I'm going to go ahead and stain with my Waverly Antique Wax. And for my second cube, I'm going to take my Delta White metallic paint and I'm going to paint that white. Now for the third cube, this is the cube that I didn't put a hole in. We're going to just stain that with the Waverly Antique Wax. Once that's completely stained, I'm going to whitewash it a little bit with the Waverly Plaster Paint. Now that we have our 3 blocks or pumpkins ready to go, let's go ahead and work on our stems. We have the spindle that we cut in half earlier, and this little peg here I got from the Dollar Tree in the Crafter Square section. These are so fun. So I'm going to go ahead and stain a few of these pegs using my antique wax. And then for the last little peg, I am going to use my satin finish black multi-surface paint. And I changed my mind with the peg from the Dollar Tree, and I went ahead and I covered up that antique wax with my Waverly Truffle paint. No, I couldn't just leave the last one alone, so I took my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster and I whitewashed the spindle that was done with the antique wax. And now here's all 3 of our stems ready to go. Let's put these little pumpkins together. For our first pumpkin here, we're going to take some wood glue and a little bit of hot glue, and this is how we're going to attach the stem since we did not drill a hole for this one. And now once our stem is attached, all I'm going to do is take a little bit of hot glue and I'm adding a little raffia bow to accessorize. Now for our next little pumpkin, I'm using the white metallic pumpkin and I'm taking a little bit of hot glue and just adding that to the top of the hole. And then we're just going to insert that spindle in, and it fits really tight in there. You might not even need to use the hot glue, but I just wanted to be sure. After that, I do a little bit more hot glue and add a small black bow, and this pumpkin is complete. It's very chic and fun. And for our farmhouse pumpkin here, we're just going to add a little bit of hot glue, add that spindle, and then there is a cute little bow that we put on the top there that's white and black, and a little twine bow as well, just to give it a little bit more dimension. And now our third little pumpkin is complete. And here is all of our pumpkins all done up. I think these turned out fabulous. These would be a wonderful addition to your tiered tray, a shelf sitter, placed around the kitchen, around other pumpkins. We're going to start this inspiration today using 4 Dollar Tree 5x7 canvases. And for our first step is just removing the canvas from the frame. And to do this, I'm just using some pliers and a screwdriver, and I'm just going to remove the staples from the back. Now with the magic of video, we'll go ahead and speed this up, and you can see that we've taken off our canvas and we have 4 blank frames ready to go. Next, I'm going to take my Waverly Antique Wax and stain all of these frames. And if you haven't done this before, I just use a baby wipe and wipe them down and then let them dry. Next, we're going to take some wood glue and a little bit of hot glue, and we're going to go ahead and make what looks like a window panel. So we're just going to attach these together, and I'm using my pink clips that I got from the Dollar Tree. You could use some clamps or simply just hold them together long enough for the hot glue to set, and then set this down on a flat surface to dry. Next, we repeat the same steps on the other 2 frames and let them dry as well. Once those are completely dry, we're going to go ahead and attach the 2 pieces together using the same method with the wood glue and the hot glue. Now here's what your frame will look like when that is completely dry. Now let's go ahead and do all of our embellishments to this fun window. I'm going to start out with this wood truck that I got at the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to tape it down to a paintable surface. By taping this down, it's not going to move on you when you're trying to paint. It also is great for you to be able to kind of lift that piece of cardboard up so that you can get those outside edges really easily without getting your fingers all messy. So it's one of my tricks that I like to do. So we're starting out with Apple Barrel Tuscan Teal, and next I'm going to use my terracotta black for the wheels. And I used the terracotta black because it had a little bit of a texture to it, and I thought that kind of fit in with what the truck wheels would be like. For the wood feature on our truck, I'm just going to use Waverly chalk paint in the color Truffle. And for the bumpers on our truck, I'm going to use Waverly chalk paint in the color Elephant. I'm also going to use this elephant color to just give some highlights to the truck to kind of give it some dirt and rust look on our truck. And for our final color on this truck, I'm using Waverly chalk paint in the color Sandstone, and we're just going to do a little bit of highlights on that wood part of the truck. Once our truck has dried, I am grabbing out the stencil that I got last year on Amazon, and it is still available, so I'll put a link for it in my description box below. And we're just going to use the Happy Harvest portion of the stencil, so we're not going to use the pumpkin or the leaf. So I'm just going to center that underneath the window of the truck and using my chalk paste by Redesign, and it's this vintage lace. It's like a light off-white white, and we're just going to go ahead and squeegee that over the top of our stencil, and then we'll remove this stencil. Now this fall set of stencils that I got, I came with 6 different stencils, and I have used them on multiple projects for the last 2 years. So I think it was a really good investment for $6.99, a little over $1 a stencil, but I keep reusing these over and over again. They wash up great. So back to our cute little truck. I think this stencil turned out great on this truck. I'm going to set this aside to dry. At Dollar Tree this year, this is a new item that I found, and it's this fun garland that has pumpkins on the garland. And so I am going to actually take these pumpkins off the garland, and they're just hot glued together. And when you take them off, you'll have 6 little pumpkins. And I really like these metal pumpkins, and we're going to put 3 of them in the back of our truck. Next, we'll save those beads. I'll leave them on the strand so they're easier to store. Now let's go grab our little truck and 3 of these pumpkins. To attach these pumpkins, what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue them onto the back side of this truck. And I'm just using some hot glue to do this, but I am going to have the pumpkin kind of stick up a little bit higher than the bottom there, just so they kind of poke out of the truck. And for the 3rd pumpkin, I'm just going to stick that kind of on the top, like a little pyramid coming out of the truck. Be really careful. I was putting the hot glue directly on the back side and then putting down my pumpkins, but you can notice that I'm not holding on to it for very long because that metal does get hot with the hot glue. So while that is drying, I am going to make up all the rest of the embellishments that we're going to use for our window frame, and then I'm going to show you how to put this all together. So I'm starting out with a pick that I got from the Dollar Tree, and this is just one pick, and I'm taking it apart. Next, we'll go ahead and gather up 3 of the pieces and make a mini bouquet and take some floral tape to attach it. Now that those bouquets are finished, we'll set those aside and we'll start working on our farmhouse bow. For our first step on this bow is we're taking some wired ribbon and I'm just going to make the shape of a bow. Once I've done that, I'm going to add an additional loop on either side until I have 3 loops on either side of my bow. Next, I'll just go ahead and cut the ribbon from the spool, and we're just going to continue to hold that ribbon in the center, and we're squishing that together, and then you add a little pipe cleaner and twist that around as tight as you can, and this keeps the shape of the bow all nice and pretty. Now, once you have that pipe cleaner attached, I'm going to take a small piece of the same ribbon and I'm going to fold it into thirds. And what we'll do is we're going to wrap that around the piece of pipe cleaner to cover that up and finish our bow. And to attach, I'll use some hot glue on the back side of the bow. Now, all you have to do is fluff out your bow and decide how you want your tails to look on the edges of your bow. Now the fun part, let's put all of these things together. So I'm going to take this adorable truck and we're going to take hot glue and a little bit of wood glue and we're going to add that to the center bar of this window. So I'm starting out with the wood glue because that takes a lot longer to dry. And then quickly I'll use my hot glue and add a stripe of that onto our little row and then place down that truck. And the hot glue just helps that truck adhere to the wood quicker, and then that wood glue will take a little bit longer to dry. And once your truck is in place, we'll go ahead and grab those little bouquets that we made. And we're going to take those bouquets and we're going to line that on the bottom row of this window. And I'm using 2 zip ties to go ahead and attach those bouquets. And I wanted the window to be able to sit flush against a wall when I hung it. So I used the zip ties and I closed them at the front of the bouquets. And to cover up those zip ties, I took a piece of raffia and I just tied it in a simple knot. And we're going to hot glue that to the front. And I thought that we might need a little bit more at the bottom of this window. So what I did is I had another pick that I had gotten from the Dollar Tree. And this one had a mini pumpkin on it as well. And we're just going to attach that right to the center just to kind of make it more of our centerpiece on the bottom. And for the top of our window, we are going to add our bow that we made. And I'm just using hot glue to attach the bow. Now I flip this over and I'm going to add a quick little hanger. I'm using some jute and I made a little loop. And using hot glue, I'm just going to attach that to our frame. Now let's go ahead and flip this frame over and check out our adorable truck. And I just love how this piece turns out. This just screams fall to me. The truck, the pumpkins, the wood, the farmhouse feel it has. This may be one of my favorite fall decor pieces. I would love to know what you think. Please feel free to leave a comment below and let me know what your favorite is today. So I walked by this adorable hedgehog at the Dollar Tree and I just loved it. However, I went through the whole entire box and I couldn't find one that didn't have some sort of defect to it. So I found the best looking one and I decided, you know what, I'm just going to paint this over again and make it my own so that I have a really cute hedgehog for the fall season. And since this hedgehog is made out of a hard plastic, I am going to use my Paint for Plastic by Folk Art to do the painting for him. And I will link these Paint for Plastic paints in my description box below, just in case you're interested in them. So now time to paint this little hedgehog. I start out by just painting everything on the back side of him with the dark brown paint. And this is just... it's such an easy thing to do, but you can already tell how much different it looks once you're done painting him. And I found these cute hedgehogs the other day at, I believe it was Home Goods, and they were like $14.99 a piece. So giving this little $1.25 hedgehog a facelift will save you some money, but give you that decor piece that is in style for this season. Now for the fur on the front side of this hedgehog, I am going to take my cream color Paint for Plastic with a little bit of the brown, and I just mix that up until I get a color that I like. And then I'm just going to paint everything on the front side of this hedgehog. And now for some of the finishing touches on our hedgehog. I'm using the color Iced Tea for the pumpkin here. At first I thought about making the pumpkin like a light blue or turquoise to go better with my tray, but I really like the idea of the orange pumpkin, so I stuck with that. But you can do whatever you guys would like to do for your hedgehog and make it match your decor. And after I painted the eyes and the mouth again with the black colored paint, I just went back in and I needed to get the top of the pumpkin. So I did have a green paint for here, but it was really green. So I did add a lot of brown to that just to kind of tone it down to make it look more like a pumpkin stem. Now here is our finished little hedgehog. I think he turned out amazing. And I'm going to do a little bit of a before and after here. So here is our before picture. And here is our after picture. I just love how this hedgehog turned out. He totally stole my heart, and I cannot wait to display him as my masterpiece on this tiered tray, because he definitely is my favorite of the day. We're starting today's project out with a board from the hardware store and our Waverly Antique Wax. And I am going to go ahead and stain both sides of this board using our antique wax. I thought I was going to use regular stain, but the antique wax worked amazing, and I really liked the color it brought to the board. And as you've probably guessed, we are making a leaner for our front door. And I really wanted to replace the fall one that I had previously. So I'm using these letters from Walmart, and I'm just going to place them down on a paintable surface. And using some painter's tape, I'm going to actually tape these down. And I found by taping these down, it does make it a little bit easier for me to actually get around the edges of the letter without getting my fingers all sticky with paint. So on these letters, I'm going to do a different painting technique that I haven't done before on my videos. For our first step, we are going to go ahead and paint a single coat over the top of the letter and on the sides. And I'm using multi-surface folk art paint, and this one is vintage white and it's a satin finish. And we're just going to do a really nice coat over everything. And you can see here by having this taped down, it's really easy to get the edges around the letters. Now, while that first coat of paint is drying, I grabbed these shelf liners from the Dollar Tree. And this is just like that rubbery shelf liner that you can find. And I'm going to cut a piece that will fit over the top of our letter. Once I have that laid over the top of our letter, I did grab some painter's tape and I just put a little bit down on either side just to make sure nothing moved around while we were painting. We're going to use the same paint we used earlier, and we're going to paint over the top of the shelf liner on top of the letter. And for this step, I do a thick coat of paint over the top of the letter. Now, while the paint is still wet, we're going to go ahead and remove that shelf liner from our letter. Now here you can see we have a really nice texture of paint over the top of this letter. Let's repeat this same step on the rest of our letters. I did use the same piece of shelf liner for all of the letters. All I did was wash the shelf liner or rinse it off under some water and let it dry for a minute before I reused it. And now that all of our letters have been painted and textured, I'm going to go ahead and grab out this plaid stencil that I've been using a lot in some of my crafts. And I did get this stencil on Amazon, so I'll put a link for it in my description box below. But I'm just going to lay this over the top of my letter. Now for our next layer, I am going to be using this real brown multi-surface satin paint from Folk Art. And this works out really nice. I'm just adding a little bit to my bowl, and then I'm going to brush this over the top of my stencil. Now with the texture underneath it and different things, I wasn't too worried about a little bit of bleeding because I wanted to make sure this kind of had a cozy and like flannel feel to it. And once we're done applying all of our paint, we're going to remove that while everything is still wet. And then I did go and I rinsed off my stencil so that I could reuse it on my next letter. We're going to keep repeating this step until all of our letters are the same. While these are all drying, I am going to grab this pumpkin that I got from the dollar store. And you've probably seen these around. They've had them for a lot of years. For our first step here, we're going to remove the hanger and the bow from this pumpkin. And I have found that using a heat tool or a hot blow dryer will help soften up that hot glue on your project, making it easier to remove. And now that I have our piece taped down to a paintable surface, I'm going to be using my multi-surface satin paint in the color Pueblo, and we're just going to give a nice coat of paint over the whole entire pumpkin. And I did do 2 coats of paint for this pumpkin. After I painted the pumpkin, I forgot to paint the stem, so I did come back with my real brown paint and painted the stem. And to give a little bit of dimension to our pumpkin, I did use the vintage white, and we'll just go ahead and dry brush really lightly around our pumpkin. Now, while that pumpkin is drying, I grabbed this Hello wood cutout from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to tape that down to a paintable surface. And you guessed it, we are going to paint this as well. I am going to be going ahead and using that real brown paint again, just to keep with our theme. And I did do 3 coats of paint over the top of this hello. Now that we have our pieces made for our pumpkin, off camera I did make a cute little bow. We are going to hot glue and use some wood glue to put this hello onto our pumpkin. And I like using this combination of glue because the wood glue takes a little bit longer to dry and sticks really well to other pieces of wood. But the hot glue gives it that immediate hold, which gives it time to cure for the wood glue. Now, once we have that hello centered on our pumpkin, I do use my paint clips to clamp that down, and I do let this cure for about an hour. Now let's go ahead and remove our clips and add our bow. When I made this bow, I did use a pipe cleaner, so I left the little pieces of pipe cleaner on the end so it'd be easier for me to feed through that hole on the top of the pumpkin, and then I just wrap that up and around the top of the pumpkin. And now that our pumpkin is complete, let's put everything together on our board. For this step, I laid everything out on my board and I just kind of eyeballed where I wanted everything. And then I went back in with my straight edge and I made sure to space everything out. And I did a spacing of about 1.5 inches. And to attach everything onto the board, I'm using my wood glue and a little bit of hot glue. And one thing you'll notice is that I do leave my straight edge on the board as I'm putting the pieces down underneath where I'm going to put the next item. So this helps me align where I'm going to put everything so I don't have to remember when I pull everything off to put the glue on. And once we have all of our letters attached to our board, I did let this sit for about an hour, hour and a half to let the glue just cure together before I lean this up against the wall. Now here is what our leaner looks like all put together. I cannot wait to display this for the fall outside my front door. This is just adorable. And we have the back side available for us to do a Christmas or Thanksgiving sign or Halloween sign if you'd like. Let's transform this wood house into a beautiful decor piece for your tiered tray or as a shelf sitter. For our first step, we're going to take a piece of painter's tape and tape this down to a paintable surface. Now that that is secure, I'm grabbing my Waverly chalk paint in the color Truffle, and I'm going to give a nice coat over the top of this wood piece. I also did paint the sides of this wood piece because if you're looking at it from a tiered tray, you still may see those. Now I'm grabbing my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster and this amazing stencil that I found on Amazon this year, and I'll put a link for it in my description box below so you can check it out. Now we're just going to lay this over the top of our little house. Next, I grabbed a sponge brush that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to tap that down on a little piece of scrap paper there before I go ahead and I start painting my stencil. Now that we have our paint applied to our stencil, we're going to go ahead and just remove that really carefully. And this turns out amazing. You could leave it just like this, but I'm going to embellish it. We're using these fun cutouts from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just using one of the maple leaves. I'm taping this onto a paintable surface, and then using my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster will give a nice coat over the top of this leaf. Sometimes hot glue is not the right method for attaching things, and I felt that way for this project. So I'm using my Elaine's tacky glue and a paintbrush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint a stripe of glue along the center of this little wood piece. And once we have enough glue in the center, I'm going to place a little piece of burlap over the top of that glue. And I did fray the edges on this ahead of time, just to give it a little bit more texture. Now for my next step, I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing with the glue, and I'm going to do a stripe of glue over the top of the burlap. But this time, I am going to add a ribbon to that piece of glue. Now, once those pieces have dried, I'm going to do the exact same thing for the last piece, but for this one, we're going to do it a little bit different. I flip over our leaf, and I'm using the same Elaine's tacky glue, and I'm going to brush the back side of the leaf to get glue on all sides. And now we'll just place that right in the center of our piece. And that's all there is to it. This perfectly simple little shelf sitter is ready to display on your tiered tray or on a shelf. Now let's flip this over and make something else on the other side, because who wants a plain decor piece when we can use the back side for another one? So I'm starting out with my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster, and we're just going to do a nice coat over the back side. Next, I went ahead and grabbed my Waverly chalk paint in the color truffle, and I'm just going to do a little bit of dry brushing on the outside perimeter of this little house. Now, every year, Dollar Tree gets these wonderful window clings in, and this year didn't disappoint. I'm going to use the Fall is in the Air piece on this window cling. Now, we're going to set this aside for a moment and go back to our block. Now that everything has completely dried, we're going to use our super matte Mod Podge over the top of this block. And while it is still wet, we're going to lay down our window cling. The Fall is in the Air. And I just tap that down into place. And while it was still wet, I decided to add a little pumpkin from the window cling pack as well. Now, once that has completely dried, I go back to my Mod Podge Super Matte, and we're going to do a nice coat over the top of this window cling, and that will take any of that sheen or window cling look away from that. So this looks like it was just part of the board, and it works out so amazing. So if you haven't tried this Super Matte Mod Podge before, I really recommend it. And now once this is dry, I'm just going to add a raffia bow to the top using my hot glue, and a little twine bow on top of that just to give it a little bit more. And now I love how this turns out. Now we have a fun two-sided sign that we can put on our tiered tray or on a shelf. Let me know which side you like better, the leaf or Fall is in the Air. Let me know in the comments below. Let's elevate this Dollar Tree pumpkin into something gorgeous. So grab a Dollar Tree pumpkin and a hula skirt, yes, hula skirt from the Dollar Tree. And jumping right in, we just unwrap that hula skirt, and I'm going to tape this down to my table. And we are going to braid 3 strands at a time and make just simple braids going down the hula skirt. And once you get down to the bottom of your braid, I just go ahead and do a quick little knot. And for me, I found this really easy to do. I love that the hula skirt was on the string there, so I could just slide the braid down a little bit further, and then I would just start with the next 3 strands and go ahead and braid again. Now going back to that Dollar Tree pumpkin, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to remove the stem from that Dollar Tree pumpkin, and at the top part of this pumpkin, I'm going to take my craft knife and just cut a small circle around in the center. And I repeat that same step on the bottom part of our pumpkin. Now grabbing some of those braids that we made with the hula skirt, I'm going to go ahead and just fold one of the braids in half. And if you notice here, one of the sides of the braid has a little bit more of a tail on it. And I wanted it that way because you're going to see what it looks like here in a few minutes. And I'm just going to hot glue basically like a V shape around the pumpkin here. So I'm stuffing that V at the very bottom of the pumpkin, and then the top of the pumpkin is going to be where we have our little knots. So let's just watch that again. And once we have that final braid glued into place, this is what our pumpkin looks like. And so all of those little extra pieces of the hula skirt is going to now make our stem, but I did want to add one more little embellishment. So I grabbed a bow and I'm just going to hot glue it to the top of our pumpkin. And that is all there is to it. This fun pumpkin now looks like something that you bought from a high-end store, but you made it from 2 items from the Dollar Tree. I love this little acorn at the Dollar Tree, but I did want to do it a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the thankful from the front of this acorn. And for this craft, I want to go with more of a black and white theme, so I'll save those pieces for something different. Next, I grabbed my zip sander, but a sanding block or piece of sandpaper would just be fine. And I'm just going to sand off any of that extra glue that was on there and just smooth it out as best that I can. Now, once I am satisfied with this piece, I'm going to take a piece of painter's tape and just tape this down to a paintable surface. Now let's grab our Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I'm going to do a nice coat on the bottom part of this acorn. And once I had 2 coats of the Waverly chalk paint on the bottom part of this acorn, I did do a single coat on the top part. And now that that's dry, I did take my little pen here, and this is a paint pen in the color black, and I'm just going to trace out the acorn pieces on here. I wasn't too excited about how this was looking, so I did take some of my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster again and just dry brushed a little bit over the top of our acorn top. Now let's grab our Waverly chalk paint in the color Ink and just paint that stem a little bit of black paint there. Next, I grabbed this fun stencil, and I did get this stencil on Amazon, so I'll put a link for it in my description box below. And I'm going to get the one that says "It's Fall, Y'all," and we're just going to add that to the front of our acorn. And using our Waverly chalk paint in the color Ink, we're just going to go ahead and paint over the top of the stencil. And next, the fun part, we get to remove this stencil and see our beautiful design. And I'm liking how this is turning out, but I did decide that I wanted the acorn to be a little bit darker on the top, so I grabbed my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ink, and I'm just going to go ahead and dry brush a little bit more over the top. So you can do this in a bunch of different ways, whatever works best for your decor. I just kind of wanted to show you my method through my whole process here. And now that I'm satisfied with my acorn, I take a little bit of hot glue and I'm just going to attach a little finger bow onto the top of our acorn. And that is my final bit for this project. I love how this turned out. It's such a classic look with the black and the white, but gives that farmhouse feel, adding that little bow. To start this craft with one of the foam pumpkins from the Dollar Tree and some yarn that we got at the Dollar Tree. And I'm measuring the yarn out in 18-inch strips. And once we have our first strip of yarn cut, I'm going to go ahead and measure out 11 additional pieces. So we need a total of 12 18-inch pieces of yarn. Once we have everything together, I'll just tie those pieces together with a knot. And for our next step, we're going to tape the yarn down to the table. And I'm taking 4 strands of each into 3 different bunches. And we're going to do a basic braid, and we'll braid that all the way down to the bottom. And once we get the braid complete, we'll just finish with a knot. This is one of my favorite pumpkins to make in the fall. It's fun because you get to make a whole bunch of little braids. I usually make 34 to 35 braids per pumpkin, and it's something you can do while you're just watching TV for a little bit and you just need something to do while you're relaxing that doesn't take much effort at all. And now that our braids are complete, let's move on to the next step. I'm taking a wine cork and some ribbon that I have from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to wrap the ribbon around the wine cork. And every few wraps, I'll use a little bit of hot glue just to make sure everything stays into place. And I really like this ribbon from the Dollar Tree. It has like just a little circle that you can cut out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut one of the little circles out, and I just hot glue that right on the top of the wine cork. And this is going to be the stem for our pumpkin. And I just think it adds a lot of character and makes it look so pretty. Now, if you don't want to wrap it with fabric, you could also paint the cork or just leave the cork the way it is. So the Dollar Tree carries a bunch of these different types of foam pumpkins. You might see them in white, black, or orange. And I'm just going to cut a circle out of the top and of the bottom of this foam pumpkin. Now here comes the fun part, putting the pumpkin together. We're going to take all of those braids that you made and we're going to stuff them in the pumpkin on the top and on the bottom. You're welcome to hot glue them if you'd like, but as you can see, once you start putting a bunch of these braids into this pumpkin, it stays in pretty secure. So you don't have to hot glue if you don't want to. When you get to the last few braids, sometimes you need to push the other braids that are around the pumpkin out just so that you can make sure to fit all of the braids in. And the tighter you get them in there, the better. And once you're all done, your pumpkin's gonna look like this. Now I'm going to take my wine cork and insert it into the top part of this pumpkin. Off camera, I made a cute messy bow, and if you haven't made a messy bow before, you're just basically layering 2, 3, 4 pieces of ribbon and you tie them in the center. And I wanted to add a little bit more detail, so I added a raffia bow right to the center of the messy bow, and I'm just going to hot glue that. And it didn't quite stick the first time, so I did have to add a little bit more hot glue, and I used my makeup applicator this time to really press that bow in. And now our pumpkin is complete. I love how this one turned out, and I can't wait to make a whole bunch more for the fall season.